Hey guys, it's Patton Kesselring, and welcome back to another episode of Ascendancy of the Terrible, that series where I look at all that's bad that the militaries of the world and the greater universe have to offer. And this week, boy do I have a treat for you. We're taking a look today at a plane that was so dangerous it earned the nickname the Ensign Eliminator. The Vought F7U Cutlass was a U.S. Navy carrier-based jet multi-role fighter-bomber built during the early Cold War. It was a tailless aircraft that took its design aspects from aerodynamic data from World War II German projects from Arado and Messerschmitt. In fact, many German scientists actually worked on this project. Conceivably all the really bitter ones, it would seem. Though Vought denied any connection. The F7U was the last aircraft designed by Rex Beasel. Beasel? This guy. The man responsible for the first ever US designed fighter, the TS-1. So now we know who to blame for this. What exactly do we blame him for? Well, let's have a look at some stats. This single-seat product of Chance Vought Company had a length of roughly 12.6 meters, 41 feet 3.5 inches, a wingspan of 12.1 meters, 39 feet 8 inches, which could shrink down to just 6.8 meters, 22.3 feet when the wings folded, a height of 4.27 meters, 14 feet even, and a wing area of 46.1 square meters, 496 square feet. It weighed 8,260 kilograms, 18,210 pounds empty, and 12,174 kilograms, 26,840 pounds loaded. The Cutlass had a max takeoff weight of 14,353 kilograms, 31,643 pounds. It was powered by two Westinghouse J46 WE-8B afterburning turbojets, producing 4,600 foot-pounds of thrust dry and 6,000 in afterburner. The plane had a max speed of 606 knots, about 1,122 kilometers an hour, or 697 miles an hour at sea level in military power and afterburner. It had a cruise speed of 490 knots, 910 kilometers an hour, or 560 miles an hour at between 11,800 meters, 38,700 feet, and 13,000 meters, 42,700 feet. Its stall speed was about 112 knots, 207 kilometers an hour, or 129 miles an hour, with its power off at takeoff, and at 93.2 knots, 173 kilometers an hour, or 107.5 miles an hour while approaching for landing. It could climb at about 73 meters a second, 14,420 feet per minute, in military power, and an afterburner to a service ceiling of about 12,375 meters, 40,600 feet. It could reach 20,000 feet in 5.6 minutes and 30,000 feet in 10.2 minutes. It had a wing load of 245 kilograms per square meter, about 50.2 pounds per square foot. It had a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 0.45 and a takeoff run of about 486 meters, 1,595 feet, with military power and an afterburner. It was armed with four 20mm M3 cannons above the inlet ducts with 180 rounds per gun. It also had four hardpoints to carry 2,500 kilograms, 5,500 pounds, of ordnance, including up to four AAM-N2 Sparrow air-to-air missiles. 320 Cutlasses were produced from 1948 to 1955. It first flew, somehow, on September 29, 1948, and was introduced to the fleet in July of 1951, and was retired by March of 1959. Not a stellar career. It was a radical departure from traditional aircraft. You know the ones. The ones that fly and don't blow up or crash. Any of that stuff. You know. Things like that. And it suffered many technical and handling problems. The Cutlass was responsible for the deaths of 4 test pilots and 21 U.S. Navy pilots. Over a quarter of all the airframes built were destroyed in accidents. The F7U was Vaught's entry into the U.S. Navy's competition for a carrier-based day fighter that opened on the 1st of June 1945. Former Messerschmitt AG senior designer Waldemar Voigt, I think, who supervised the design and development of such aircraft as the P-1110 and P-1112, contributed to the Cutlass's design. The Navy wanted a fighter that could fly at 970 kilometers an hour at 12,000 meters. That's 600 miles an hour at 40,000 feet. The Cutlass had a broad-chord, low-aspect ratio swept wing with twin wing-mounted tail fins either side of the fuselage, which created quite possibly the ugliest airframe ever developed, made worse by the cockpit being situated so far forward. The cockpit placement, however, was functional, in that it allowed the pilot good visibility during final approach. It was named the F7U when it won the competition. Must have been the only one competing for it to have won. Pitch and roll were controlled by tailerons, or as Vought called them, elevators. Yeah, I don't know either. Slats were fitted to the entire leading edge. All controls were hydraulic. The plane had a very long nose wheel strut that allowed for high angle of attack takeoffs. The nose gear was one of the main fail points and caused many spinal injuries to pilots on landing. The hydraulics provided artificial feedback so the pilots could feel aerodynamic forces acting on the plane. These hydraulics operated at 3,000 psi, which was double that of normal Navy aircraft. It was unreliable and not fit for frontline service. The underpowered Westinghouse J34 engines, which according to some pilots, quote, put out less heat than Westinghouse toasters, were also an issue. And this led to another excellent nickname, the Gutless Cutlass. It was also dubbed the Praying Mantis in kinder, or should I say, less hostile moments. On July 7, 1950, Vought test pilot Paul Thayer ejected from his burning prototype in front of an airshow crowd. This is usually the first evidence that a plane is probably not going to fare very well. None of the first 14 F7U-1s built between 1950 and 1952 were approved for squadron use. On December 20th, 1951, the F7U-3 took off for its maiden flight. It featured a new engine, stronger airframe, and extra maintenance panels for service. Test pilot and future astronaut Wally Schirra wrote that he considered the F7U-3 to be accident-prone and, quote, a widowmaker. However, it was also a very stable gun platform, maneuverable, fun to fly, and fairly sturdy with the new airframe. Test pilots praised the high roll rate at 570 degrees a second, which was 3 times faster than most any other production jet fighter at the time. The Cutlass did have one particular flight characteristic, though, that pilots were definitely not praising, and that was this annoying tendency to gyrate during a stall. Lieutenant Moriloso found himself in such a situation, and found that letting go of the control stick to reach both hands to the ejection handle caused the fighter to self-correct. This meant that the normal recovery process didn't apply. However, this was actually a good thing, because the F-4 Phantom suffered the same post-stall gyration. Lieutenant Matt Connolly, a pilot on the USS Constellation during the Vietnam War, experienced this post-stall gyration on May 10, 1972, and he said that the aircraft needed to pick up airspeed to start flying again, and the best thing to do was to put your hands in your lap and enjoy the ride. Prototypes were ordered in 1946, with the first example flying at September 29, 1948, piloted by Vaught's chief test pilot J. Robert Baker at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And fortunately, this went off without a hitch. And by hitch, I mean fatal crash. During testing, one of the prototypes reached a max speed of 1,058 kilometers an hour. 625 miles an hour. Production orders were placed for the F7U-1, which was very similar to the prototype, and further developed into the F7U-2 and F7U-3 versions with more powerful engines. However, due to development issues, no F7U-2s were ever completed. The F7U-3 would incorporate many improvements that were needed after testing of the F7U-1. The first 16 F7U-3s didn't have afterburners, as they used the Allison J35A29. The Westinghouse J46 turbojet eventually became the engine mated to the airframe for final production. 288 were sent to squadrons, equipping 13 Navy squadrons. However, any further development was ceased with the development of the F8 Crusader. The F7U's performance suffered due to a lack of engine thrust. And since thrust is fairly important when making carrier takeoffs and landings, the Cutlass was absolutely terrible at them. Furthermore, the ones with the J35 suffered a rather catastrophic flaw, as the engine would flame out completely in the presence of rain. VF-81 was the first unfortunate squadron to be saddled with the Cutlass in April of 1954. Few squadrons ever made deployments with the fighter, and most beached them ashore during a cruise due to the many operational difficulties. Units that did take them to sea were as follows: VF-124 aboard the USS Hancock from August of 1955 to May of 1956, but after pilot George Millard was killed in a landing accident, the captain of the Hancock ordered every single Cutlass off his ship. VF-81 aboard the USS Ticonderoga from November of 1955 to August of 1956. After a pilot was injured after a nose gear collapse, the squadron was again ordered ashore. VA-86 aboard USS Forrestal during its January to March 1956 shakedown cruise. VA-83 aboard the USS Intrepid from March to September of 1956. VA-116 again aboard USS Hancock from April to September of 1957. VA-151 aboard USS Lexington from May to December 1956, VA-212 aboard USS Bonhomme Richard from August of 1956 to February of 1957, and VX-4 aboard USS Shangri-La and USS Lexington. In 1957, Vought analyzed the accident records and found that the 78 accidents that resulted in a quarter of the airframe's loss in only 5,500 flight hours meant that the F7u Cutlass had the highest accident rate of all the Navy swept-wing fighters. What a prestigious superlative to hold. The poor safety record meant that Vice Admiral Harold Martin, the Air Commander of the Pacific Fleet, replaced the Cutlass with the Grumman F9 F8 Cougars. The Cutlass was even used by the Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron, the Blue Angels. The Angels flew two, numbered 122426 and 122427, as a side demo during the 1953 show season to promote the aircraft, but didn't use them in normal formation. They were found to be unsatisfactory here as well. Issues that the Angels encountered included landing gear failures, hydraulic failures, engine fires, and once one of the landing gear doors fell off and somehow didn't hurt anyone. During the 1953 season, Lieutenant Edward Faitner, who was the former program manager of the Cutlass, experienced a total loss of hydraulics on a full afterburner steep takeoff. Because he was too low to eject, he had to stay with the aircraft while it gained altitude, which fortunately was long enough for the backup system to come on. He clipped the trees at the end of the runway, causing the port engine to flame out. He made a hard turn and thankfully got back to the runway. While traveling to another show, Lieutenant Harding McKnight experienced an engine flameout, forcing him to land at NAS Glenview. Faitner was with him, and he was directed to land his F7U at the recently completed O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Faitner was forced to land on the not-yet-open runway, which made the F7U the first aircraft to land at O'Hare. After these incidents, the Angels dropped the Cutlass and they were flown to Naval Air Station Memphis, where they were abandoned to become maintenance instructional airframes for the Naval Technical Training Center. The variants of the F7U were as follows. The prototype XF7U-1, 3 of which were built, and all 3 were destroyed in accidents. The F7U-1, 14 of which were built. The F7U-2, none of which were built, but 88 were ordered. The F7U-3, the final version, 180 of which were built. The F7U-3P, a photo reconnaissance version, 12 of which were built, but none saw service. The F7U-3M, the missile-capable version, 98 of which were built, 48 of which were conversions. An additional 202 were ordered, but this was cancelled. And the A2U-1A ground attack version, 250 of which were ordered, but the order was also cancelled. Some of the notable accidents are as follows. 26th July 1954, Lieutenant Floyd Nugent ejects from his Cutlass armed with two 2.75-inch rockets. Crashed close to shore after continuing its previous course circling the North Islands of San Diego. 11th of December 1954. During the christening of USS Forrestal, Lieutenant J.W. Hood was killed when his Cutlass had a malfunction with the wing locking mechanism, causing the plane to crash into the sea. 30th of May 1955. Lieutenant Commander Paul Harwell's Cutlass suffers an engine fire on takeoff. He ejected and never flew a Cutlass again. By the time it was all over, he had more flight time in a parachute than he had in the F7U. Don't have a date for this one, but if someone else does, let me know. Tom Quillen's Cutlass was part of a 4-ship flight. He had an electrical failure which forced him to return to base, but when he returned, he had to wait in the pattern for 2 other Cutlasses from his flight. 14th July 1955. Lieutenant Commander J.T. Alkire killed in a ramp strike on USS Hancock. 4th November 1955. Lieutenant George Millard killed when his Cutlass went into a cable barrier at the end of the USS Hancock's flight deck. The nose gear malfunctioned and drove the strut into the cockpit, triggering the ejection seat and dislodging the canopy. Millard was launched over 60 meters, 200 feet, forward where he hit the tail of a parked A-1 Skyraider and later died of his injuries. As a result, the captain ordered every Cutlass off his ship. Amazingly, 7 of these aircraft still exist today across the U.S. They are in the following places. Number 128451 is at NAS North Island, San Diego, California. 129554 in Snohomish County Airport, Payne Field, Everett, Washington. 129565 at Grand Prairie, Texas. 129622 in Phoenix, Arizona. 129642 at the Wings of Freedom Aviation Museum in Horsham, Pennsylvania. 129655 at the National Naval Aviation Museum, NAS Pensacola, Florida. And 129685 is unrestored in Newberry, Ohio. Alright, on to the opinion section, and, well, it's my opinion, and probably most people's opinion after seeing this video, or if you've heard of the F7u Cutlass, that this thing should have never been allowed to set on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. In fact, this thing should have never been cleared for frontline service. It's fortunate that there was no war at the time that these aircraft were in production, because they would have been a major hindrance to the Navy. It's just unfortunate that 4 test pilots and 21 Navy pilots had to be killed in order to prove this. I mean, you know, it's fairly obvious what the problem is here. The design is not particularly good. It does have some good things about it, don't get me wrong. The roll rate is particularly good, and most fascinating to me is the post-stall gyration, which actually shows up on other Navy fighters like the F4 Phantom, and training pilots how to deal with it is a good thing. But most of the things that are good about it are overshadowed by the fact that it had terrible engines, poor design, landing gear that would smash through the airplane, and so many other problems that I've already listed. I'm not going to go through them again. I've already gone through them all. You get the point. It's just, this plane should not have been accepted by the Navy. I mean, the FJ1 that we talked about, I think, last Warplanes episode, it had issues. But it was still a fairly operational fighter. This thing can barely fly. I mean, you know, when it's an achievement to land and not kill yourself. I mean, you know, that was an achievement back in, 1903, 1904, when the Wright brothers were flying. In 1951, you should be at a point now where you can fairly confidently land on a runway. And I know you're going to say, well, it's a carrier fighter, shouldn't it be able to land on a carrier? Well, yes, but there's certain aircraft that are not capable of landing on an aircraft carrier. Most Air Force planes are in that category. But they can land on runways. The F7U can barely do that. So it definitely can't land on a carrier. So, I mean, it's such a disgustingly bad plane that it honestly, I have a hard time believing that it came out of Vought, considering that they did the F4U Corsair and later did the F8 Crusader, which are both brilliant carrier aircraft. It's a little hard to believe that it came from the same company. But it did, and it exists, so here we are. Not going to go into a whole lot of details. My opinion on this should be fairly obvious by now. So, well, there you go. I would say I hope you enjoyed this, but, I mean, an airplane that's most famous for killing its pilots probably is not a particularly enjoyable thing to listen to. So, I'm just going to say, let's hope you learned something. And if you did, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.